Is it true that the EPA has never obtained formal legislation, authorization legislation from Congress? It's never been authorized by Congress.
EPA is not authorized by Congress?
I'm asking you.
I thought EPA was authorized by Congress.
Well, the EPA is not. The EPA has never been formally authorized by Congress. However, this agency has imposed over $1.3 trillion in regulatory costs since the Biden regime took office. We authorize committees here in Congress to ensure that we have proper oversight and accountability in the functioning of the executive branch. And this process is extremely vital because often we see agencies abuse the separation of powers, creating rules, laws, regulations without consent of Congress. And we appropriate funds to agencies like the EPA and expect these tax dollars and this tax dollar funding to be used in accordance with the legislative priorities and comply with the oversight requirements.
It's just shocking. You spend so much time with our regional staff and regional administration and Region 8 and have such productive conversations about how we're doing things for your district and your state, and then you take this microphone and you
I've also seen the coal plants that have been decommissioned in my state.
But 100% we should not
I've seen the energy regulations that have regulated my district into poverty.
You're spending time with my staff.
Sure.
In your district.
Of course I am. I have oversight over your staff, and I want them to answer. I want them to provide a service for the American people. But there are so much. Yes, there are some things that have been done well, but not everything.
100%
when we have $617 billion per year in rulemaking, that is absolutely absurd. When you are taking our affordable clean energy and regulating it out of existence and killing these good-paying jobs in my district, yes, I have a problem with that. In my home state of Colorado, out-of-touch Denver and Boulder leftists voted to reintroduce gray wolves. Since then, 10 wolves were reintroduced in December, and 8 have confirmed wolf livestock depredations and 6 separate incidents involving wolf attacks in Colorado just this month. My Trust the Science Act delists the gray wolf from the federal endangered species lists and returns the issue of the wolf management to states and tribal wildlife agencies.
Once again, Republican leadership has taken an opportunity to vilify an endangered species today here on this floor, to sacrifice it to their precious industry groups. Guns, oil, and polluters. That has come to be what the GOP stands for, at least in this Congress. Last summer, they rushed to the House floor with bills to increase the extinction risk of the lesser prairie chicken and the northern long-eared bat. Today, it is the iconic gray wolf. Do my Republican friends truly have nothing better to do with their time, with the time of this body? We should be working on issues that make a difference to everyday life in America. But this Congress has been mostly about Republicans fighting with each other in a circular firing squad, and the only time they seem to take a break from that is when they want to do something to enrich the wealthiest Americans, harm the environment, or now to kill wolves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that utilizes the Holman rule to reduce the salary of EPA Administrator Michael Reagan to $1. On his watch, Administrator Reagan has used the EPA to impose Green New Deal policies such as electric appliance and EV mandates, power plant closures, strict regulations on American energy production, and environmental justice initiatives.
When the Holman rule was originally put in place years ago, it was meant to identify people who had committed crimes, and we've had some of those that have been fired. It wasn't meant to identify people who had policy differences. Those are what elections are about. Anybody who suggested that on this side of the aisle that we were going to elect the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, that the policies that they enacted were going to be things we supported, I think we're living in a different world.
You know, there's a lot of conversation around rolling back regulations. My colleagues continuously talk about rolling back regulations and not really understanding the importance of these guardrails.
Often we see agencies abuse the separation of powers, creating rules and laws, regulations without consent of Congress.
And so I just want you to listen to a situation that technically impacted your agency. In 2018, Trump made sure that he scrapped a 2015 Obama-era rule requiring advanced braking technology on trains transporting particularly hazardous materials. That rule would have required compliance by certain trains by 2021 and others by 2023. But as Fortune reported at the time, Trump's Department of Transportation decided that the cost of installing these more sophisticated brakes outweighed the benefit. While it has been noted that technically the rule would not have required the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in Ohio to have such brakes, some believe it would have if not for Trump. Norfolk Southern estimates that it will spend more than $1 billion to address the contamination caused by the East Palestine derailment and improve rail safety and operations, which includes this settlement with the United States valued at over $310 million, as well as around $780 million in environmental. Regulations are made to protect people from potential disasters such as this. And I can pretty much probably guess that the people of East Palestine would have preferred that there would have been some protections that would have kept them from enduring that terrible situation.
It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you kindly, and it's always delightful to hear my friend from Colorado speak. One thing that I do want to point out, however, because there might be some students in the gallery today, is that there can be no illegal aliens and there can be no green card holders in Congress, because the Constitution very clearly specifies that you must have been a citizen for 7 years before you run for the House, and you must have been a citizen for 9 years before you run for the Senate, and you must be a born U.S. citizen in order to run for president of the United States, which some of the historians, as I think I mentioned before, attribute to Thomas Jefferson trying to write Alexander Hamilton out of the presidential sweepstakes. In any event, I think that my colleagues should probably relax with some of the hyperbole and exaggeration here. After all we're saying is let's keep doing what we've done since 1790 in the country. This is the way that the census and the reapportionment have always been run in the United States of America, and what they're proposing is obviously a radical departure from what the Constitution ordains.
I rise in favor of my amendment, which would prohibit federal funding for the countering group extremist activity working or implement any recommendations from the group. In 2021, Democrats and the Biden regime unjustly used January 6th to prop up this woke working group to provide cover for unjustly targeting members of our military. Under the Biden regime, DEI instruction and management has reached new heights that threaten to weaken the bond between America's armed forces and its civilian leadership and undermine our military effectiveness and readiness. All of our men and women in uniform deserve to have the best tools needed to carry out their mission to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, Liberal ideology undermines this mission. In order to stand up to China, Russia, terrorists, our military needs to project strength, not cultural wokeness.
Mr. Chair, to be clear, January 6th was an attack on America, our democracy, and this institution which we have all taken an oath to serve. This shouldn't be controversial, but service members who swear an oath to the Constitution should not try to overthrow the United States government. My colleagues allege that the department's efforts to counter extremist activities unfairly targets conservatives. There's nothing in the Countering Extremist Activity Working Group's final report to substantiate that allegation, because violent extremism, regardless of its political or partisan leaning, is a danger to all of us and to this democracy. But there can be no denial that far-right extremism is surging across the country at a much higher level than that of left-wing extremism. A recent study showed that violent extremist acts in the United States were far more likely to be associated with far-right ideologies like white supremacy than for any far-left alternative. In fact, the level of violence perpetrated by right-wing extremists in this country is on par with, if not higher than, that of Islamist extremists. In our country, where service members have access to critical national security information and assets, individuals motivated by extremist ideologies can pose an outside threat to our national security when they move beyond fair and legal expression of contentious issues and into subversive or even violent actions.
It's so sad to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle hate Christmas. This would allow restoration of our forests. Like I said, our forests are overgrown. This would allow a fun way for families to participate in healthy forest management by thinning some of the living trees that are overgrown on our forest lands.
As a Christian, I am offended that my colleague on the other side of the aisle would suggest that I hate Christmas. This bill has nothing to do with inhibiting people from celebrating their religious holidays, including through having a Christmas tree. This amendment and this debate is about the fact that this amendment does not do what the gentlelady from Colorado claims that it does. This bill does not require regional foresters to do anything. I support the Forest Service using its existing authority to permit the harvesting of Christmas trees and trees for firewood, but that's not what this amendment actually does. I'd like to close by observing to my colleague that many of us make happy family memories with trees that are living. We have ways to enjoy trees without cutting them down or burning them.
In 2009, the Obama administration upheld the decision to delist gray wolves when their Interior Secretary, Ken Salazar, a Democrat from Colorado, announced the decision at a press conference that the Fish and Wildlife Service decision to delist gray wolves was a, quote, a supportable one. Scientists have concluded that recovery has occurred, end quote. In 2011, Congress directed USFWS to reinstate a rule to delist the gray wolf in the northern Rockies ecosystem. In 2013, the Obama administration proposed delisting gray wolves in the lower 48 states. In November of 2020, scientists and nonpartisan career employees at the Department of Interior once again found gray wolves were fully recovered and once again issued a rule that returned management of gray wolf populations to state and tribal wildlife agencies. Unfortunately, frivolous litigation was filed by the Defenders of Wildlife, Wild Earth Guardians, and other extremist groups, and an activist California judge subsequently pandered to these groups by vacating the 2020 rule and ultimately relisting the gray wolf by judicial fiat. State and tribal wildlife agencies have a proven record of successfully managing gray wolves. In fact, Montana's successful state management resulted in gray wolves being 500% above Fish and Wildlife Service recovery goals. Idaho's successful state management resulted in gray wolves being 700% above recovery goals. There are now, as estimated, up to 6,000 wolves in the lower 48. Furthermore, There are an estimated 7,000 to 11,000 gray wolves in Alaska, and there are an estimated 30,000 gray wolves in Canada. Again, an endangered species list success story. Let's do as my bill says, trust the bipartisan science, and pass this bill so we can finally delist the fully recovered gray wolf and focus scarce taxpayer funding on endangered species that actually need help being recovered. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield.
This bill is falsely named. It's called the Trust the Science Act. And it would legislatively delist the gray wolf in the Endangered Species Act in the lower 48. That is not something that is done based on science. It is something this bill would do by political fiat. The gray wolf is one of America's most iconic species. And while it is making a comeback, the science and the facts on the ground tell us that it still needs help. This bill would make it so that not a single gray wolf in the United States, in the entire country, would be protected by the Endangered Species Act. Yes, it is true that the Yellowstone, the National Park wolf reintroduction, is one of the great success stories of the ESA. We saw that as apex predators, wolves help to rebalance and revitalize vibrant ecosystems and flourishing wildlife populations in one of the crown jewels of our national park system. The ESA has kept the wolf from going extinct. We've gone from only several hundred wild wolves in America, and these were inhabiting northern parts of Michigan and Minnesota, to approximately 7,500 wolves today, with populations in at least 11 states. That is the ESA in action. It's a great success story, but that doesn't mean that we can just unfurl a banner and declare mission accomplished. And certainly not when folks who took wolves to the brink of extinction are ready to rev up the wolf-killing machine once again and put us right back on that path to extinction. Wolf numbers have grown in the western United States, but the ESA rightly requires more than just population counts for delisting. Otherwise, we can quickly devolve right back to where we started. There are still a lot of factors that go into species recovery: habitat destruction, disease, the regulatory and recovery efforts by states that would have to take over management of the species if it is delisted, and a lot more. So the ESA requires that the Fish and Wildlife Service use the best available science to assess all of this, not just population numbers, before they make any delisting decisions. And importantly, the Fish and Wildlife Service must consult with tribes. Right now, the service is following these processes and developing a recovery plan. But if this bill was signed into law, all of that would be skipped. They would have to ignore any scientific evidence of remaining threats to the wolf. And this is the danger of legislatively delisting a species. While I believe my colleagues are capable of going onto Google and pulling up some population numbers on gray wolves, it is pretty brazen to suggest that they, as members of Congress, are more qualified than the scientists and experts with years of training to determine if a species is actually recovered. The ultimate goal of the ESA is to recover species and then set them up for success post-recovery. We need durable, not temporary outcomes. Passing this bill would simply call wolves recovered, but that does not make it so. The bill ignores science, and it sets a species back down the path to extinction by reinstating a Trump-era delisting rule that the courts have overturned because it violated the Endangered Species Act as well as the Administrative Procedure Act. This bill ignores the careful analysis of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over the past year. It ignores the fact that although wolf populations are doing well in some places, they haven't met recovery goals in others. It does nothing to require federal consultation with tribes. And on top of that, there's nothing in the bill to push states to improve their conservation measures for wolves. When wolves were delisted in 2011 and 2021, some states raced to approve the killing of significant portions of their wolf populations, even using harvest quotas. States in the northern Rockies actually incentivized hunting. They paid hunters to kill wolves. Now, this does not demonstrate a commitment to conserving the species once it's delisted. All of these state policies would simply further villainize wolves and reward the type of killing that caused the population to crash in the first place. So no, a simple head count is not a scientifically sound basis for declaring open season on the gray wolf. My Republican colleagues know that what they're trying to do will never stand up to scrutiny in the courts. It would never stand up to consideration of the best available scientific and commercial data, and that's why this bill prohibits judicial review. And that really gives the game away. If you really trust the science, then you shouldn't be afraid of a little scrutiny. Based on the talking points that we've heard throughout this legislative process, this is all just so people can shoot more wolves. Why would Congress invest millions of taxpayer dollars in recovering this iconic species just to turn around and let states start killing them all over again? We'll hear a lot in debate today about how these apex predators, which are vital to our ecosystems, are scary, cold killers. That is ancient ignorance, not science. If we're lucky, we may even hear some of the wild conspiracy theories that we've heard in previous debates about larger, faster, more aggressive Canadian gray wolves. We've heard practically everything except the claim that these Canadian wolves have laser eyes. Look, Congress shouldn't be overriding conservation decisions made by scientists. Fortunately, we have this type of extreme, baseless language. We heard it a few years ago as dozens of Republicans made these claims during debate. I urge my colleagues and fellow conservationists to actually trust science, to vote no on this Trust the Ignorance Act. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The so-called countering group extremist activity working has been weaponized and implemented to almost exclusively target Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians serving in the military. And yet, by its own metrics, it has been a massive waste of money and time. The Defense Department continues to spend large amounts of time and money to combat extremism, yet its own analysis of the situation shows that it's entirely unnecessary. In fact, fewer than 100 service members have been subject to the discipline due to engagement in extremist activities. That's only 0.005% of the approximately 2.1 million active and reserve personnel. Clearly, extremism is not the problem that my colleagues on the left and media outlets made it out to be. The United States military is tasked with one mission: maintaining mission critical readiness to protect the American homeland. Sowing our armed forces with divisive rhetoric designed to pit races and genders against one another is not only morally wrong, it poses a very real threat to our national security.
Yet the latest report from the Department of Defense Inspector General found that 78 service members were alleged to have advocated for the overthrow of the government in the past year alone. That is likely an undercount given reported challenges in gathering and compiling data across the military departments. Clearly, extremism in the military remains a persistent and serious issue, one that we should not take lightly, again, given the January 6th insurrection in which we know some service members and veterans participated. This fact alone should be deeply concerning to every single one of us in this chamber. Instead of taking this problem seriously, this amendment prohibits the Department of Defense from implementing recommendations designed to counter extremist activity in our military. This undermines unit cohesion, the readiness of our forces, and ultimately public trust in our military. Tackling extremism in our military is not about promoting wokeness, which my colleagues continue to be obsessed about. It's about protecting our people and our country. And that, sadly, also means preventing domestic terrorism and addressing the serious and persistent threat to our homeland. And is also about restoring public confidence and trust in one of the most important institutions in our history and society. I urge my colleagues to reject this dangerous amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
So, Mr. Regan, last month, the Supreme Court rightly overturned the Chevron doctrine, which the EPA relied on to support its very controversial and costly rulemakings. Since your agency has never been authorized by Congress and has since lost most legal standing, does your agency still plan to enable rogue bureaucrats to enact unconstitutional regulations?
I'm not quite sure I follow you. You're saying that
I'm saying the
we have
Chevron
no- we have
doctrine
no
was
statutory-
overturned by the
we have-
Supreme Court.
We have no
We have all
statutory
of-
authority.
I'm saying you've never been
Congress
authorized.
doesn't-
Wait, hold on.
Congress doesn't delegate authority for us to do the regulations and the business and the policy. So since 1970.
So the
we've been
Chevron
sitting here
doctrine, where you
rogue.
have created all of these rules under that have been proven to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, has been overruled. So now I'm asking, are your bureaucrats still going to implement these rulemaking processes?
You do know Chevron is not just focused on EPA. So
But you are. So I'm asking about the EPA, and I'm asking about your rogue bureaucrats that have enacted these unconstitutional regulations. Are you going to repeal them? Are you going to continue to implement them, or are you going to stop altogether, since it's been overturned?
do you understand the ruling?
Do you understand the
I
ruling
do.
of the Supreme Court?
I do. And so your question is ill-formed. No.
Will you
we're
be
not gonna,
repealing?
We're not going to stop.
So you're going to unconstitutionally continue with these
We're going to
rulemakings.
We're going to
in
adhere to the
EPA.
Supreme Court and continue to
So
do
which
continue to do our,
rulemakings are you going to roll back?
We're going to adhere to the Supreme Court and continue to do our work in accordance to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court
So which
made a
ones are you
ruling-
going to repeal?
The Supreme Court didn't tell us to repeal anything.
They have been deemed unconstitutional.
No.
Absolutely, they have. This was a huge victory. And, you know, I mean, even in our appropriations bill in the House this year, the funding has been reduced by 20%. I would argue that it needs to be reduced by 100%. But in this, it's because of these radical Green New Deal policies that jeopardize domestic energy development and overload America's power grid and raise costs on American consumers and businesses. So with the EPA and these overreaching regulations, do you have any intent on working with the House majority to lower energy costs and produce more reliable and affordable energy?
If you look at our rule, we are producing reliable, affordable, diverse.
I think
energy
America's
solutions.
Americans' wallets would disagree with that. I mean, the Biden administration, if they continue under Obama's administrative policies, this regulatory pace for a full 8 years, the cumulative costs of this administration's rulemakings would exceed $60,000 per household. And as you know, the Biden administration reversed President Trump's successful deregulation by executive order. So the Biden regime is on pace of increasing regulatory costs at a rate of $617 billion per year in just rulemaking that we are seeing is unconstitutional.
Wow. Mr. Regan, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I would just like to clarify a few things for my colleague from Colorado. The Loper-Bright ruling, as you know, said that the courts should not defer to agency rulemaking if a statute is ambiguous, and instead the courts get to determine whether or not what the statute means. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that would not require any regulations to be reversed or overturned, correct?
Correct.
On Michael Reagan's watch, the EPA has prioritized DEI over domestic energy, climate change over consumers, and EVs over our great economy. In a hearing with the Oversight and Accountability Committee, he was unaware that the EPA has never formally been authorized by Congress, something that someone who oversees an agency should know. In March of last year, the EPA Twitter account posted, quote, "As a bicultural, bilingual, and bisexual woman, Iris deeply empathizes with communities at the intersection of overlapping crisis of injustice, hashtag climate change, and environmental racism," end quote. We cannot have the head of the Environmental Protection Agency claiming that even the environment is racist. This is, you know, another season of all the questions are made up and none of the points matter. The American people want their government to work for them, not against them. This administration's Green New Deal regulations are increasing regulatory costs at a rate of $617 billion per year of rulemaking. Is that clear? $617 billion in just rulemaking alone. This isn't a bill that Congress is passing, it's just rulemaking by the agency itself. And if they continue at the Obama administration's regulatory pace, this will cost American families $60,000. It's time to put an end to governing by the Green New Deal, which is very much a scam. And the first step is to get rid of Administrator Reagan.
Anybody who suggested that on this side of the aisle that we were going to elect the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, that the policies that they enacted were going to be things we supported, I think we're living in a different world. They're enacting their policy. Instead of doing these types of amendments, and I've opposed every one of them except one, instead of doing these types of amendments, what we need to do is, if we oppose them, get out and elect another president to get the job done. This doesn't do anything. If you could tell me that they had committed some crime, something that they didn't have the authority to do, then maybe we'd consider it. But I noticed on all of these things, there's an awful lot of Holman amendments that are going to be, and I'm only going to speak on one of them. Same message goes out for all of them. You don't do this because, frankly, I don't think we have the authority to do it, even though the rule of the House says we do. But they are appointed and they are confirmed by the United States Senate. I don't think we have, and this is essentially firing. When you reduce the salary to $1, you're firing the individual. I don't think we have that authority. So unless you can show me that they have done something illegal, high crimes or misdemeanors, something like that, I think this is silly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to offer my amendment that utilizes the Holman rule to reduce the salary of Director of Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Elizabeth Klein, to $1. Ms. Klein is a radical environmentalist and a partisan hack comprised of special interests and mirrored in ethical conflicts. Her conflicts of interest were so severe that even Senator Manchin voted to block her nomination as Deputy Secretary of the Interior. During her testimony in the House Committee on Natural Resources, I questioned Ms. Klein about her failed nomination to become Deputy Secretary of the Interior. I asked if she had been provided with a recusal list and formally requested that she provide that list to the committee. Ms. Klein told the committee that she was, quote, happy to provide that list, end quote. Shamefully, it took a letter from the committee and this aggressive committee questioning for Klein to send the committee a very delayed recusal list that should have been in place almost immediately after her hiring. Ms. Klein spent several years funneling money from Michael Bloomberg to sue the Trump administration and pay for the Green New Deal scam. Lawyers she had placed in attorneys general's offices across the country. Given her myriad of federal lawsuits and conflicts, there should be little to nothing that Ms. Klein is allowed to work on at any sub-agency within the Department of Interior.
This amendment, once again, is petty and punitive. I don't think this is the appropriate place to pursue grudges against public servants, hard-working public servants who we ask to do an extremely important job in Washington. Let me just say this. This is a use of the Holman Amendment in a way to just talk about my colleague on the other side of the aisle's objection to the work that's going on related to climate change. This bill is going to be full of amendments from people who either don't believe in climate change, don't think we should invest in it, aren't willing to think about the future. This is our job, is to make sure that we are protecting the future of this planet, of this country, of our economy, of the people who live in the United States, the future for our children and grandchildren. We're going to hear a litany of opposition through amendments like these, from people who don't believe that we're having the hottest summer on record, who aren't paying attention to the extreme floods, to the storms that are impacting us, to the damage it's already done to the economy, to the billions of dollars we're already spending, who are going to use any means possible to block the work we're doing to fight climate change. I oppose this amendment. I'm going to continue to oppose these amendments that are really just another way to deny that climate change exists and that we have a responsibility to work on it. I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Maine reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized. And she has 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say that I care deeply about our environment. I want clean air. I want clean water. I want to be able to be good stewards of the land that we have been gifted here in the United States of America. And I don't believe that pursuing these extremist Green New Deal scam policies is advancing that agenda that we have. I don't want to spend tax dollars on these initiatives and this purpose. I want to do the work of the people, and I believe that my amendment gets us one step closer to that by reducing the salary of Ms. Klein to $1. Madam Chair, I yield.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Maine is recognized.
Once again, I will say that we're going to have a litany of amendments from people who don't believe in climate change, no matter what they say, no matter how many times people on the other side of the aisle say, oh, no, I really want clean air and clean water, but I don't want to do the hard work that has to be done. And to call these policies extremist, Green New Deal policies is just a way to dismiss that we have a serious problem before us. We have serious work to do. It is our responsibility to protect the planet for future generations, to make sure that we can continue to live and exist on this planet. I reject this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Maine yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rise to offer my amendment that redirects $2 million to hazardous fuels reduction activities within the Bureau of Land Management to prevent catastrophic wildfires and save lives. The year I was elected, Colorado suffered the worst fire season in Colorado history with the 3 largest recorded wildfires we have ever had. Hundreds of homes were destroyed and evacuated, and Coloradans endured more than 100 days of fire. The Cameron Peak fire burned more than 208,000 acres and more than 460 structures to the tune of $6 million in property losses. The East Troublesome fire on the border of my district killed 2 people. Coloradans also suffered severe health issues resulting from significant smoke from these fires. Wildfire smoke causes serious disorders, including eye and respiratory tract infections, reduced lung function, bronchitis, exacerbation of asthma, and even premature death. Let's put the lives of the American people first, take significant action to benefit our environment by passing my hazardous fuels reduction amendment and redirecting $2 million to these hazardous fuels reductions activities within the Bureau of Land Management. And I encourage the adoption of my amendment. Madam Chair, I reserve.
Well, I'm very, very supportive of increasing funding in this important program. And I want to thank the chairman for his work over the years, hard work and bipartisan work in combating wildland fires. But I simply cannot support the offset proposed for this amendment. Funding for the EPA in the base bill is already cut $1.8 billion below the enacted level, and this reduction makes it impossible for the EPA to carry out its mission. We need the worker bees of the EPA to keep the EPA moving forward for the American public. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman from Minnesota yields back her time. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Chair, I am proud of my party's work in reducing taxpayer spending by $1.8 billion in this bill. And I also am encouraged to find even more offsets where we can redirect funding and put them to a more appropriate use for the taxpayer, showing that their best interest is what we are all here serving in Washington, D.C. on their behalf for. Madam Chair, again, I support the adoption of my amendment that redirects $2 million for the fuels hazardous management in the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Colorado yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I rise to offer my common sense amendment that redirects $2 million of the Inspector General to combat waste, fraud, and abuse within the EPA. As a proud member of the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, I am a firm believer in increasing transparency of federal programs and actions within the executive branch. Honest, hardworking Americans should be able to trust that their tax dollars are being spent responsibly and for their intended purposes. The EPA Office of Inspector General is charged with providing critical oversight over tens of billions of dollars that are spent by the EPA, U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, as well as more than $100 billion that is being doled out through the so-called Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that we all know did nothing to reduce inflation. Ask anyone you meet in a grocery store. My common sense amendment will help ensure that the Inspector General has the funding and resources they need to provide strict oversight of the EPA. I have found a pay for, so this is not deficit spending. We are not wasting taxpayer dollars. We are redirecting these $2 million. And I urge my colleagues to support my amendment to redirect important resources to the Inspector General. Madam Chair, without a reserve.
Madam Chair, to be clear, I fully support the oversight efforts and believe in the mission of the Inspector General's office across this government. It's vital. When I was former chair of this committee, I supported their work. I supported their work as the former chair of the Defense Subcommittee and as ranking member. But I have to strongly disagree with the offset and the treatment of the EPA in this bill in general. In base bill, the EPA is cut by nearly 20%. Almost every single account is cut except for the Office of the Inspector General. So quite frankly, the Inspector General's office does pretty well under this bill being protected. Cutting every single program at the EPA and seeking to increase funding for only one office, which happens to be the Oversight Office, is clearly an attempt by the majority to politicize the Inspector General, and that to me is just unacceptable, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chair, I rise today to offer the amendment on behalf of my friend from Montana, Representative Zinke, which will improve the effectiveness of the Good Neighbor Authority. The Good Neighbor Authority program enables cross-boundary forest management activities with states, tribes, and counties. Collaborative tools like this program are critical to confronting the wildfire crisis, as raging wildfires don't respect man-made borders that separate forests into different jurisdictions. Since 2014, over 490 Good Neighbor Authority projects have been started in 34 states, and more than 273 million board feet of timber is sold yearly through this program. Currently, funds from the sale of timber from Good Neighbor projects can be used to treat insect and disease-infested trees, reduce hazardous fuels, improve forest health, and restore and repair decommissioned Forest Service roads necessary to implement restoration activities. This amendment would expand the permissible users of timber receipts derived from Good Neighbor Authority projects to include the reconstruction, repair, and restoration of roads on non-Forest Service land when such activities are needed to implement forest management projects on federal land. New road construction on federal lands would also be permitted use under this amendment to facilitate authorized restoration projects. However, these new road projects would still be required to comply with the applicable environmental review processes. Further, this amendment would allow timber receipts to be used to construct new roads to replace existing roads that adversely impact forest, rangeland, and watershed health. Access to areas urgently needing treatment remains a huge challenge to improving forest health. Roads are beneficial for forest management, provide the public with access to outdoor recreation opportunities, and enable safer and more effective wildland firefighting.
This amendment would permit the use of Good Neighbor Authority revenues for the construction of new roads. Currently, the Forest Service manages 372,000 miles of roads across 193 million acres that they manage. Due to such a large inventory, the Forest Service often faces financial difficulties in operation and maintenance. Over half, over 58% of the Forest Service's $7.66 billion of deferred maintenance is related to roads. The Forest Service has a colossal network of roads that is already far too big for them to maintain. For this reason, it is hard to support an amendment that would allow the construction of even more roads, that doesn't provide any resources for the future maintenance of those new Forest Service roads. Our Forest Service is spread dangerously thin due to Republican budget cuts. This amendment would make the problem even worse. I urge a no vote and reserve the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 12, printed in Part D of House Report 118-705. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 12, printed in Part D of House Report Number 118-705, offered by Ms. Boebert of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1486, the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Boebert, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado.
Mr. Chair, I rise to offer my amendment that clarifies existing authorities may be utilized to prevent wildfires in fire regimes 4 and 5, thereby expanding the acres of at-risk forests that would be eligible for streamlined management authorities. This important amendment is critical to fire mitigation efforts across the states of Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Utah, Nevada, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York, Maine, West Virginia, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Missouri, Louisiana, Mississippi, Indiana, Ohio, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Virginia, North Carolina, Iowa, Florida, and Texas. The Forest Service estimates 63 million acres are currently at risk of catastrophic wildfire, and each year, nearly 10 million acres in the U.S. catch on fire. Colorado also had the 3 largest recorded wildfires in state history in 2020. Federal agencies have chosen to spend billions on the back end putting out wildfires as opposed to prioritizing active management up front that would reduce the size and number of wildfires. According to the Colorado State Forest Service, more than 24.4 million acres of Colorado forest land impacts Colorado's water supply, where 80% of the state's population relies on those forest watersheds for municipal water supplies. Healthy forests act as a natural water filter and storage system and are critical to maintaining healthy watersheds In the United States, forests are a source of drinking water for over 180 million people. We can reduce the size and severity of wildfires through active forest management, which will also help protect our watersheds and municipal water supplies. Let's actively manage our forests, be good stewards of the land that we have been blessed with, and pass this important amendment. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
The gentlelady from Colorado reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentlelady is recognized.
This amendment would further expand a categorical exclusion under the National Environmental Policy Act for projects completed in 2 additional fire management regimes. For context, one of the new regimes, Fire Regime 5, applies to vegetation types that rarely burn, typically due to a lack of moisture or fuel. The fire return interval in those landscapes is more than 200 years. Because of the categorization of these fire regimes, hazardous fuels management is not as high of a priority and does not need a legislative categorical exclusion expansion. This follows the trend that my Republican colleagues have been setting. They have been legislatively expanding categorical exclusions, and Natural Resources Committee Democrats remain opposed. During our debate today, we have shown how meddling in the National Environmental Policy Act process is dangerous and how it sets a precedent that will do more harm than good. Categorical exclusions are most effective when they are developed with expert input by agencies and the Council on Environmental Quality, instead of mandated by Congress. This amendment simply continues to build on the slew of National Environmental Policy Act waivers that the Fix Our Forest Act advances, and it's no surprise that my Republican counterparts have chosen to make this amendment in order. I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady from California reserves. Gentlelady from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I seem to recall just yesterday that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle had no problem meddling in NEPA to get their left-wing projects through CHIPS authorized. The proposal of utilizing existing authorities to prevent wildfires in fire regimes 4 and 5 is crucial as it focuses on proactive management and streamlining of forest health. As someone who prioritizes human flourishing, I see the value in taking measures that can prevent environmental disasters that have devastating impacts on human beings and their property. It's important to remember that we have the power to shape our environment and neutralize dangers through human innovation, powered by cost-effective energy. In the case of wildfire prevention, this could mean better forest management practices, controlled burns to reduce fuel load, and advanced fire detection and suppression technologies. Again, Mr. Chair, I would urge the adoption of my amendment, and I yield.
Gentlelady from Colorado yields. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I continue to oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to offer my amendment that will require regional foresters to submit a plan through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program for the treatment and removal of trees killed by or infested with bark beetles in western states. The bark beetle epidemic has caused significant damage to roughly 100,000 square miles of forest in the western United States alone. There are 600 different species of bark beetles in the United States. Several species, such as the mountain pine beetle attack, and they attack and kill live trees. Most species of bark beetles live in dead, weakened, or dying hosts. Along the West Coast and through the Rocky Mountains, bark beetles have affected tens of millions of acres of forest. While bark beetles are native to U.S. forests and play important ecological roles, they can cause extensive tree mortality and negative economic and social impacts. Spruce beetles have killed millions of trees on more than 1.8 million acres in Colorado since 2000 and provided increased fuels for wildfires. In Colorado, 2021 was one of the worst wildfire seasons our state has ever endured, with 3 largest fires in state history. Bark beetle epidemics and catastrophic wildfires are a significant threat. This can be minimized by thinning overgrown forests and removing hazardous fuels produced by beetle overpopulation. This process is sure to create jobs and increase overall forest health. I urge passage of my amendment that would prioritize collaborative forest landscape restoration program activities that address the bark beetle epidemic, a major contributor to wildfires in Colorado and the West. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves.
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
This amendment was summarized by Republicans as requiring the regional foresters to develop plans for the treatment and removal of dead or dying trees due to insect disease. However, I want to clarify that this amendment actually doesn't require anything of regional foresters at all. Instead, it requires special consideration for project proposals under the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program that seek to remove or treat insects or diseases. The purpose of the Landscape Restoration Program is to encourage the collaborative, science-based ecosystem restoration of priority forest landscapes. Insect treatments are already eligible under the program and are executed often as restoration treatments. However, they are also often and should be used in tandem with other collaborative strategies as part of a broader landscape treatment plan. I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today to offer my amendment that requires regional foresters to submit a plan on the sale of Christmas trees and firewood on federal land. Under current law, American families can purchase a permit from the Forest Service to cut Christmas trees from their favorite national forests, as well as harvest any firewood, transplants, posts, and poles, and other forest products to improve forest health. We have seen successful Christmas tree and firewood harvesting operations in my home state of Colorado, and this program has served as a locally based solution to help thin our overgrown forests. According to the Forest Service, quote, the permit system helps to thin densely populated stands of small diameter trees. Local forest health experts identify areas that benefit from thinning trees and tend to be the perfect size for Christmas trees. Removing these trees in designated areas helps other trees grow larger and can open areas that provide food for wildlife, end quote. My constituents are struggling right now as they deal with the disastrous effects of the Democrats' destructive economic policies. They unleashed record inflation on Americans that has raised utility bills, drove up energy costs, and made it harder to live for most Americans. My amendment provides an affordable fuel alternative for families across the nation to heat their homes, as well as create lasting holiday memories for families to interact with their local forests. I urge my colleagues to support my common sense amendment to prioritize collaborative forest landscape restoration program activities that allow for the removal of firewood and Christmas trees. Mr. Chair, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. For what purposes does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Similar to Ms. Boebert's last amendment, this amendment was summarized by Republicans as requiring the regional foresters to develop plans, in this case, the plans for the sale of Christmas trees and firewood. Once again, I would like to clarify that this amendment doesn't do that. It does not require anything of regional foresters. Instead, it requires special consideration for project proposals under the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program that seek to facilitate the sale of Christmas trees and firewood on lands under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of Agriculture or the Secretary of the Interior. The Landscape Restoration Program was not created for the sole purpose of revenue building by removing trees from public lands. The program is meant to do what it says in its program title: promote collaboration among federal land management agencies and the public for the purpose of restoring forest landscapes. Tree harvesting for anything other than the purpose of landscape restoration is not in the spirit of the program. By placing a preference on projects that are related to Christmas tree harvest, this amendment would limit the landscape restoration program by prioritizing a marketable product over landscape restoration. And to be extra clear, the Forest Service already has broad authority to conduct the sale of firewood and of Christmas trees. They don't need it under this restoration program. I urge a no vote, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Questions on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I'm going to close out my comments on all of these amendments by reiterating what I've been saying. I strongly oppose the underlying bill. It is full of poison pills that harm the environment and will spread our Forest Service even thinner right when we need them most. If Republicans had listened to the administration's concerns about how this bill is poorly drafted, if they hadn't excluded committee Democrats from the drafting process, then maybe we could have a consensus set of solutions in front of us. Instead, we have a bill full of environmental rollbacks, new unfunded programs that will spread our Forest Service thin, and no pay fix for our firefighters. It's a supposed wildfire response bill, but it doesn't have firefighter pay in it. It's a bill that's being offered by Republicans who style themselves as fiscally conservative, and yet as we approach a final vote on this legislation in a matter of minutes, we do not know the costs of the bill, because Republicans, through rushed process, made sure that the Congressional Budget Office did not have a chance to score the bill. Nothing in this amendment addresses any of these extensive and serious concerns. I strongly oppose the bill, as does Ranking Member Grijalva, as does the White House. I reserve the balance of my time.
Question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas
For what
and nays.
purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.